It is my great pleasure to introduce colleague Gilad Feldman from Hong Kong University today. He had already a long day teaching a guest lecture in the psychology research methods class. And after teaching a lot of research methods, now he will talk about some of his research, which is on altruism, morality, using experimental psychological research. And I think that's a topic that's of very broad interest to many of us, and I look very much forward to hearing about his research. So Gilad, welcome, and the floor is all yours.
Great, thank you so much for having me here. It's a real treat for me to be in Vietnam. Again, visited Vietnam many times, but last time I was in Hanoi was 20 years ago. So it's amazing to see how Hanoi has changed and to see this campus and what is happening. So exciting. I didn't really know what kind of audience. This is a much more elaborate setup than I expected, but I like it that there's people from different disciplines, from different parts. So I heard economics and philosophy and psychology and like all over. So that's great because the stuff that I prepared for you is kind of very, very basic level. But I'm happy, of course, to talk to you about how to take this forward and what to do with this. This is more of an invitation for you to collaborate with us. I'm going to discuss some of the ways by which I do research, the way that I conduct research in my courses with my undergraduate students. From undergraduate to full professors and journal editors, we welcome a community collaborative initiative for everybody to come and join. And we really believe in the large team science where everybody has a contribution. So the topic that I want to share with you today is under the title of Doing More Good, Doing Good Better. And this is borrowing a little bit from a movement, an increasing movement that is partially based in philosophy, but also touches on economics and psychology and sociology, called effective altruism. Up until 2 years ago, this sounded good, but things happened in effective altruism in the last 2 years, and now it's a little bit more debatable. So aside from that movement, I want to focus on some of the core aspects of it, which is the scientific pursuit of doing more good. What does it mean to do good? Does it mean to do more good than what, compared to what? How do we even think about this? How do we visualize these things? And what's nice about this is that this is in between experimental philosophy and social psychology, some elements. So if you're not familiar with some of the aspects of the psychology of morality and altruism, and you're not familiar with the philosophical aspects, then this would be a good introduction. But very fast, I'll try and move this into the domains of what is it that I do, what kind of this, and what is it that we can do practically in order to inform society and policy in order to really do more good in the world. In the spirit of open science, which is something that I strongly endorse and support, everything that I do is downloadable, so you can scan this and download these slides. The link to the slides will keep coming up either on the top of the screen or the bottom of the screen. Lots of hidden slides and lots of links, so if there's something that's interesting for you, you're welcome to just download the slides and click on these to gain more information. In addition, everything that I do, all the talks that I give, hopefully also this one, and also the research methods, and also all my courses, everything is recorded and shared on YouTube. So if you want to know more about what I do, both in my research, in my teaching, and with the students, you're welcome to go and have a look. So you can see all the courses that I give are recorded and shared so that everybody can benefit from this large impact as much as possible. So I'm going to start with a very famous thought experiment, which is something that we do in experimental philosophy. And it's a famous thought experiment by a famous philosopher who is still active, still very respected in the community. He has a lot of academic citations, but has a lot of impact in books published. And it's called The Child Drowning in a Pond. And it goes something like this. Imagine, this is a thought experiment, so you have to imagine things, that you are about to go into an interview and you put on a good suit. This suit costs you $1,000 US. And as you walk to your interview, you're going to be there on time, but then you notice that there's a pond. And in this pond, which is quite shallow for you, but quite deep for a child, there's a child that fell into this pond, and the pond is dirty. As you can see, it's a little bit muddy, and the child is drowning. Now you have this moral dilemma. You're thinking to yourself, I need to save this child. I must go into the pond in order to save this child's life. However, you realize two things might happen. First, for sure, you're going to ruin your suit. So you'll need to buy a new suit for $1,000 US. So $1,000 down the drain. Second thing is that you'll be late for your interview. So you'll lose an opportunity. So you have to weigh these two things. On the one side, you have a human life. should I save this baby or not, this child or not? And the second thing is $1,000 and losing a job opportunity. So I'll give you a second to think about this. Maybe you also have like a gut intuition of how you would respond to this kind of thing. So Peter Singer, the person who came up with this, asks people this. Raise your hand if you think you're one of the persons who will go and save the child in a pond. Raise your hand. Okay, thank you for that. How many of you would think that you would not go into the pond to save the little child? None of you? Difficult to even hold your hand, even if you have this. But let me say that many times there are people, especially if I do this on Mentimeter, sometimes people are like, yeah, I'm not going to do this. And the question is, this is quite obvious, right? We all think that human life is worth more than the $1,000 suit. Seems very obvious, right? What is the complication here? Why do we even need to ask these kinds of questions? This is very obvious. So I'll just reframe this question a little bit. So rather than somebody drowning in a pond just next to you, right now, there are a lot of children that are drowning, figuratively, in poverty. And this poverty is not here next to us. It's in other parts of the world. It could be in other parts of Vietnam. It could be just outside this campus. But they're drowning, and your $1,000 can save them right now. And I can reassure you, I can show you who it is that you're saving immediately if you now put $1,000. So now you have a different scenario. It's still $1,000 versus a human life. And then comes the question again, how many of you would now take $1,000 out of your pocket in order to save a child somewhere outside of your sight? Raise your hand. How many of you would do this? Good. How many of you would not do this? Yeah, so we have a few more that would say not do this. Now the question is, what is the difference between these two? And in moral philosophy, moral psychology, we try and address these situations to try and understand, so what is the difference between these two? Why in the first one, it's very obvious, close to 100% of people say, yeah, we will jump, of course, there's no, but we won't do this for other people, children drowning in other parts of the world that are in poverty. And of course, there's the issue of, is this in front of us or not in front of us? Do I know what's happening with my money? So when I jump in and I ruin my suit, it's very clear that, the suit is ruined. It's $1,000 and it goes to, I will save this child. It's up to me. But then there's the shared responsibility that we all have to poverty all over the world. And there's so many of these children everywhere, right? So psychologically, we need to try and understand what is the differences between those two. And is there a way where we can get more people to care about those in other parts where they can be saved? So we typically run experiments on these things. It's too small, but I'll just tell you that it's a between subject design. So between subject design is that we randomly assign one to participants to one of these two scenarios where we ask, would you save the child in the pond or would you save the child in South America far away? And it's almost opposite findings. So people very much likely to save in the first scenario, but not likely to save in the second scenario. So this is Peter Singer, and he has made a whole career out of this whole thing, and he has written many, many books that in the 1970s and the 1980s have made a real difference. So Peter Singer, the most good that you can do and the life that you can save, started a movement where students from all sorts of universities from around the world in their 20s decided this is really inspirational. We want to understand why people are doing what it is that they're doing, and we want to help them make the right decision. The right decision is caring about people who are not necessarily right in front of me and using our money and our wealth and our privilege and our benefits and our background in order to do as much good as possible. How can we do that? So this is actually a photograph from a TED Talk that he gave that really introduced the movement of effective altruism. So now we have a lot of charities that are handling quite a lot of money, like GiveWell or Open Philanthropy, that are trying to understand what is the science of doing good and how can we leverage this in order to help charities in order to do more good. Can we quantify what is doing more good? Can we look at a human life and say, how much is this worth to us? Can we maximize the benefits that we have? So for example, maybe $1,000 to ruin a suit, but then when it comes to children in other places in the world, maybe we don't need $1,000. Maybe we can save them with less than that. So for example, the Against Malaria Foundation funds mosquito nets in order to protect families in Africa. So in $2, you can have a mosquito net that lasts 3 years and can protect a family from mosquito bites and getting malaria. So you can prevent deaths by that. So you can start to quantify how much does it cost, how many people are affected, how many are protected, and how many lives you have saved. And more charities, Against Malaria Foundations was one of the first to try and quantify these things. More and more are following the footsteps of Peter Singer and this movement of effective altruism to try and understand what is it that we can do. Peter Singer asks, and I think this is a very good question that we should all ask ourselves. And when I first saw the TED Talk and when I first read Peter Singer's book, I thought, regardless of whether I agree with Peter Singer or not, I think this is something good for me to try and understand as a moral philosopher, as a moral psychologist, as somebody who cares about the world. And I wasn't always interested in this. Honestly, up until 4 years ago, I was doing other stuff, behavioral economics, nudging, trying to understand. Generally, if we do thought experiments about choice A versus choice B, what's going to happen. But one of the things that I was feeling bad about during the pandemic is that for the first time, people reached out to us and said, social psychologist, now is your time to shine. What is the benefit that you have to offer us in the pandemic in order to lift us up from this problem? And then I realized, I actually don't have a lot to offer. I don't know what my impact is. All I do is punch the keyboard in fluorescent light in a university room, rather than being there with their charities, with the policymakers, with their organizations, in order to help them do good in the world. So I started asking myself these things more and more. Right. So Peter Singer makes this argument. I'll read this to you, but basically it's like, if you're most people, you're probably saying to yourself right now, I wouldn't have walked past that child. I would save the child drowning in the pond. Perhaps you would have, but remember, as we've already seen, 5.4, this is 2017, 5.4 million children under 5-year-old died in 2017, with a majority of the deaths being from preventable diseases. So this is, for example, a case study from the World Bank. Take the death of this small boy this morning, for example. The boy died of measles. We all know that this could have been cured at the hospital, but the parents had no money, and so the boy died a slow and painful death. He did not die from measles. He just died from poverty, not being able to treat measles. So our money right now, instead of us sitting here doing this thing, we could have taken some of our money in order to help these children. Perhaps we can't help the 5.4. Perhaps we can only help a few of them, but is it our obligation? Do we have a moral obligation to do something about this? So Peter Singer seems to think that we do. But as an academic, I just want to present you with a question of what is the difference? How can we study this? What can we do in order to understand the psychology of what happens in people's minds when they're presented with these scenarios? And I have to say that I felt what's called the cognitive dissonance of, I understand that I can't help the 5.4 million people, and I feel really regretful that I'm not willing to take out $1,000 out of my pocket right now, or take all of my salary and donate this to charity. I felt very conflicted about who I am. Am I not a good person? Should I not consider myself to be moral and altruistic? I think I'm a good person. Am I a good person? Maybe I'm missing something. Maybe I learned something new about myself. So a lot of objection to this, saying, no, but it's not my responsibility. No, they have a government. No, there's other things. I don't know what's going to happen with the money. I don't want to support corruption. Suddenly, a lot of things floating in my mind. And I think this is a really good point for a psychologist to say, oh, what's happening in my brain right now? I need to understand this. And I want to understand this happening for all of us, right? So we embarked on one of the first studies. So I wanted to know, what does the literature say about this? And we conducted something called a registered replication report. So I went back to the literature and I wanted to try and understand, what does psychology say about the factors that affect charitable giving? So we found a book chapter from 2011, and we decided this is a great book chapter. It's written by a guy who is the editor of Judgment and Decision Making Journal. His name is John Barron. He's, I think he's in his 70s. He's been there forever, has contributed a lot. He wrote this book chapter, and it has some evidence in it. So I decided to work with one of my undergraduate students in order to repeat what it is that they've done in this book chapter, to see, does this hold? If we run this in a well-powered, pre-registered replication, would we get the same findings or not? And here you can see that finally, this undergraduate thesis was accepted for publication as a registered report. I'll just say very briefly that our registered reports tries to uphold the highest standards of open science, where we submit our pre-registration plan. So before data collection, we submit a plan to the journal. The journal sends this to reviewers to review our plan. Then we come with the best plan possible. And once we all agree on the plan, us, the reviewers, and the editor, they give us something called an in-principle acceptance, meaning it doesn't matter what the outcome is, it's going to get published. It's amazing that undergraduates are able to do this. So regardless of whether this is going to work or not, we wanted to know what the situation is. Does this still happen many years after the first publication, large samples in various places in the world? What did they look at? They looked at all sorts of things like perceived waste, past cost. In-group, out-group is a big one that we need to think about. Diversification, anonymity, paid for overhead. If you want to know a little bit more about this, actually Mannix, who ran this, at University of Hong Kong, so you're welcome to see the YouTube video. And I also present this to charities. I also present this to Effective Altruism in Hong Kong. So if you want to see how I present this to people who are not academics, there's a way for you to look into this. So I prepared a Mentimeter, but because it's a little bit elaborate and the computer is over there and I'm over here, we're not going to do this with a Mentimeter, but I do want you to think about this. And we'll try kind of and do this interactive, but I want to present you with two charities. And if you think about this, this is the simplest design possible for an experiment. Because in this experiment, there is no manipulation. There's no between subject, there's not even a repeating measures, there's no within subject design. What this does is show you two charities, and it asks you to allocate between these two charities. In this case, I'm going to show you charities that are exactly the same thing in every possible way, aside from one factor. And I want to see if this factor influences the way that you would allocate things to either charity A or charity B. So we'll do this exercise together, so you'll get an understanding of how we study these things, all right? So here we're studying charity spending on advertising. So we've got these two. They both help prevent deaths in children. Both of them can, for $1,000 prevent 5 deaths. Okay? So their effectiveness, or how good they are per dollar spent in saving lives, is exactly the same. However, charity A spends $200 of every $1,000 from the donations on advertising, whereas charity B spends $100 instead of $200 on every $1,000. And let's say that I'm giving you $10,000. Bill Gates came in, Elon Musk gave us $10,000 and say, please allocate this. And you can choose 100% to A, 90% to A, 80% to A, and the rest goes to B. How much would you allocate between A and B? So you can take a second and try to think how much you would allocate. Do I care about this? If I don't care about this, what would I do? If this doesn't matter, then I'll distribute this 50-50, right? They both are deserving, they are the same effectiveness, I couldn't care less. So if we have no effect, then it would be the middle point, right? But if we have an effect, we'll see a shift towards one of the sides. So first, you can answer in your mind what you think the right answer is. In advance, and I do this a lot with my students in my classes, what would most people do in this situation? Would it be exactly in the middle, or would they have a bias towards one of these charities? Good. And here I can show you, and this is a distribution of the responses, and you can see that the more that I go towards the right, the more that people contribute to charity B. Charity B is the one that has less advertising, right? So it really looks like people have a very strong bias, and you can see that the average is somewhere in the 75%, right? So most people have big preference for their money not to be spent on advertising. So people are very advertising averse when it comes to the way that they spend their money. And you can think, okay, so people are doing something here. This charity is exactly the same in every possible, aside from advertising. Why do people care about advertising? What is it that's happening with this advertising thing? And is this effective or not effective? And if this is not effective, then what is it that we can do in order to get people to be more effective? So next question for you is, okay, now that we know how people are, you can compare your own answers to the answers from this experiment. Ask yourself, is this effective or not effective? Is what people do effective or not effective? Now, I would like to offer you an opportunity to reframe this into something else. Let's imagine that in the first year, they've spent everything that they needed on advertising, and now it's year number 2 and they don't need any advertising anymore. So now suddenly, charity A only requires $800 in order to prevent the 5 deaths for $1,000. And charity B requires $900, so there's $100 more. And now I'm asking you, which one is more effective? So if we overcome our aversion to advertising, suddenly we realize that actually it is the one that spent more on advertising that is more effective here, if we just rule out this advertising. So is this effective that people really focus on advertising? Why is it so important for people that their money out of the $1,000 does not go to the one that advertises for $200, right? So questions for us to debate, and what can we do with it? So let's say we run a charity, and now we understand that this is the way that people behave. Maybe we can frame things in a different way. Maybe we can get people to think about things in a slightly different way over here. Now, I want to invite you to change advertising to what's called overhead. So administration. Typically, when we ask people what they imagine, so when we ask people, it's like, when you hear that some of your money is going to overhead, what is it that comes to your mind? And the typical response that we get is people feeling imagining all sorts of things, like CEOs getting massages based on their money, And this is not the case because every organization needs overhead. Actually, when we apply for grants for universities, a lot of this goes for overhead to support. In fact, sometimes you need very effective overhead admin in order to support an effective charity, right? So we're doing exactly the same trick as we did in the marketing part and changing this to overhead. How would people respond in this case? So we can see there is a bias. It's not as strong as the previous bias, but you can see that most people definitely are averse to spending their money on overhead. So they're more likely to invest in one that has lower overhead. So this is interesting. You can ask yourself, okay, is this effective or not effective? If we know this kind of thing and I'm a charity, and I want to help do good in the world, is there a way out of this? Is there something that I can do in order to improve the situation? What should we do about people who do not want to cover overhead? So here's another scenario. And in this scenario, we also have these two charities. Both of them help thousands of children. Both of them spend 50% on overhead. So this is fixed. But we give people two options between two different charities. In one, everything that they contribute goes to actually doing good. And the other part, the overhead, is covered by an external donor. So for example, we get Bill Gates because Bill Gates cares about effectiveness and Bill Gates wants to be a booster. So we tell him, we think that we have a problem with people not wanting to spend on overhead. If you spend on overhead and cover all the overhead, then people will donate more. So we give people the option of either donating to a charity that has overhead 50%, or a charity where what is it that they donate doesn't go for the overhead, but rather covered by an external donor. And we can see that there is a bias. Some people don't care. Many people in the middle, they don't really care. But it does seem like a shift, like 60, 65%, where people do prefer to go to the charity where things are covered by external donor. So if you find an external donor to cover all the overhead costs, then you might be able to boost the charity from people because people were more likely to donate to you. Because people are averse to advertising, they're averse to overhead. Okay? So I'm not the first one to come up with this. I just show this experimentally. But actually, a paper plus a book came out recently, Mixed Signals by Uri Genizzi. And Uri Genizzi and his wife, Ayelet, also published a paper in Science. So the book is based on a paper in Science. So you can see that this has real life implications because not only did they run an experiment that we were able to replicate. So you can see a successful replication on the right, where one of the findings from Science was repeated again with another sample, and they got exactly the same findings. But also you can see that they ran the field experiment. And in this field experiment, they wanted to see what actually happens. How much can you boost donations? And I have to say, I know a lot about behavioral economics and judgment decision making. Usually the effects that we get from nudging are very, very small. You get 6%, 7%. Not big effects. Very, very little in our research has a large impact. But if you look at some of these boosts, so control condition is under $10,000 in how much people were able to willing to donate. But if you look at the overhead free, this boosted things to almost 25,000. So this is a boost of 2.5. This is remarkable. So just by covering people's overheads, people were much more likely to donate. And this is in a randomized controlled trial in a field setting based on a simple experiment that we ran in the lab. So many of these insights from a very simple experiment, charity A, charity B, if you run this and you gain some insights, you should move into the field to work with charities and see, maybe you can boost donations. If you care about this in academia, maybe you can get a paper in Science. Right? Another thing that we tested, and this actually went counter to our predictions. So that's what's nice about our register report. We have a plan and we write all of our hypotheses in advance. Actually, whatever comes out, if there is a result, there is no result, the result is opposite, we still learn something from this because now we can update things. So you can think about your own predictions. Anonymity. Charity A and B both save lives in the same effectiveness. Charity A publishes the names of donors and how much they donated to the website. On the website, Charity B keeps donors anonymous. Our hypothesis, based on our understanding of how people work, in many of the universities in Hong Kong, Li Ka-shing, in many universities in the US and Europe, you have the names of the donors. This is the building of the jockey club. This is the building of whatever, a big rich man, right? So we really thought maybe the only reason why people want to donate is because they want to signal. So our prediction was that it would be a preference for people to donate to a place where they can have their name on it. Very strangely, what we got is not that. People were preferring to donate to the charities that kept them anonymous. So actually, it wasn't about signaling, right? And when we looked at the literature and we started to reach out to people and say, do you have some evidence on this? And then we saw exactly the same time when we got this published, came out a meta-analysis, and people are saying, it's very, very odd, but people prefer to be anonymous, to be identified. And now comes the question that Peter Singer would ask and effective altruism would ask, is this effective or not? Is this what we want people to do? Is it good to be anonymous? Maybe you need to be humble. If you're doing good, is it just cynical if you're just doing this for publicity, or you want to put your name on a building? So actually, when it comes to the effective altruism view of this, the more that you publicize things, the better that it is. Because if you're doing this anonymously, then people don't know about this cause. The people have less motivation, or because they don't know about this, they wouldn't even consider joining this. But if you have a lot of people donating to something that is effective, that does work, then having people donate not anonymously, but having their names and sharing this, and influencers doing all this, maybe there is a cynical part. We don't want people to do this just for their publicity, but there is something good about us sharing the good that we're doing, because that inspires other people to doing more good. So sometimes effective altruism changes the way that we consider all kinds of things. At the beginning, we thought maybe it's good to just be humble. Maybe we should keep this to ourselves. But if we think about effectiveness, we do to be more altruistic, to share more with philanthropy. So this is what I did with Mannix, and this is the register report that we ran. So you saw that I presented to you like 3 different factors, but I thought this is too slow. I really want to scale this up. If I just focus on one factor in each one of the publications that I have, then it would take us decades to try and do this. And this is where I sat with myself and thought, okay, maybe I can do something more than this. Maybe instead of me sitting with myself and thinking about factors, or me revisiting factors that were published in 2011, maybe there's a way for us to scale up that involves large team science, open science, meta science. So this is where I decided to leverage my classes for this. So in 2021, 2022, I changed everything that I do in my classes to the theme of doing more good and doing good better. And what I do in my classes is that I invite students to come up with as many factors as possible to try to identify what is it that's affecting people in the way that they choose charities. And then I run all of these hypotheses together in order to see what the result is. So I present set in 2022 in a new conference, the first time that he ran, about large team science. So sometimes instead of just us coming up with our hypothesis, what we can do is we can crowdsource. We can just say to the others, we really care about doing more good in the world. Who wants to come? And then people say, I want to come. Students get really excited about this. So instead of doing some other things and revisiting all sorts of small effects, maybe doing a thesis on something that nobody will ever read, some people students come to me in my classes like, what? We can do something that will inform philanthropy. We can inform charities. So they're very, very excited about this. And this is how we set this up. So if you want to see the syllabus of the course, so I revamped this, and this is what we ran in 2023. And basically, I gave them a bunch of different exercises in order for us to write a book together. So they wrote a book about how to think about altruism from a psychological science perspective. What did we do? So in the first year that I ran this in 2023, we had 12 teams, and they came up with 90 plus different hypotheses. And then I took some of my funding. I had some teaching funding. And then I just ran this very large scale on a large sample online, so prolific. Amazon Mechanical Turk, all these labor markets online. And then I wanted to see which are the strongest factors. And I sent out the students and I told them, find whatever you can find. If you can find this in the literature, great. If you can't, talk to charities. Go have some field work. Talk to people to try and understand what changes the way that people think about charities. And it's amazing because they came up with a lot of different factors. Now, I want to give you some context in terms of when we talk about impact in psychological science experiments, we usually quantify this with something called an effect size. So in this kind of design, so this is a one sample t-test, so we can see how much it deviates from the mean, from the split of 50-50 in the middle. So if we see like 70% compared to the 50-50 split, then we see this is significant, and a Cohen's d of, usually it has the Cohen's d. So typically in our registered report with Mannix, what we found is like effect sizes of 0.5, 0.8, which are typical in social psychology. But if you look at the factors and this competition that we ran with the students, actually some of these are very, very strong. So you can see very, very small. So I'll read this out to you. Cohen's d of 2.24, 1.78, 1.72. What kind of things? So people really, really care about risk. So they want certainty. So one of the things that they care about, they don't want to send money into the wild. Maybe it will save, maybe it doesn't save. If you can show everything that's happening in the path, if you can reduce the risk to make sure that the money actually does good, then people are much more willing to contribute to your charities. So this paradigm of give well, a paradigm of effective altruism just tries to help charities to quantify in order to see, are you doing good? Are you improving over time? So information sharing is one of those. If I donated, can I know who are the people this is helping? How was this helpful? How much money was used for what cause? So information sharing is very reputation, neglectedness, personal experience, temporal proximity, and so forth. So out of the 90, we've had over 60 of those showing very, very strong effects that can help charities do better. So obviously, this is just a lab experiment, and it's run with a lot of different things together. But now charities can test this with a randomized control trial when we give them these kinds of insights. So this is the first year that we ran this. But every year that I run this, I give students the challenge of, you need to come up with new factors. So we had 5 teams last year, 2024, and they came up with 30 different hypotheses that are completely new and not tested in 2023. And here we have slightly smaller effects. So we've got like 1.49, but still, political affiliation, especially with the US crowd, oh my gosh, people are very, very strongly objected to all kinds of things that are not affiliated with their politics. Affecting financial situations, so if something that I donate to is affecting me indirectly, then that's generally a thing. And what's nice about this is that this is the first time that not only they need to come out with something novel, but another thing that happened in 2024 is that ChatGPT moved from 3.5 to 4. And instead of the HKU policy, University of Hong Kong policy of you should not use ChatGPT, don't use generative AI, I said, let's use as much generative AI as possible, as long as you're transparent of what it is that you prompted and what was replied, come up with as many factors as possible. So suddenly, they fed ChatGPT with all the books about effective altruism and all the literature, asking ChatGPT to come up with new factors. It's amazing what they came up with. So now we can train students, instead of fearing or blocking or just punishing students for using this, leveraging these tools. Because now it's very important. It can inform research, and now we can do a lot of things on that. Another thing that happened with ChatGPT, it's just something for you to consider, is that before we go to the field, before we test this on real participants, we can also simulate participants. So first, to get some reaction, we can ask ChatGPT to pretend as if it's a person from the Midwest in their 30s, a male, and then ask it, if you had this kind of dilemma between charity A and charity B, how would you answer? And then we can compare the ChatGPT simulated answers to real participants and see if these align. And what's shocking about this is that very often they do align. There's a very high correlation. So these ChatGPT simulations are getting very, very good at predicting what people can do. So sometimes you can even make the claim that just as a pretest, it's very good to run these things with generative AI. So we have a lot of main insights, and we try to communicate this to charities, to open a discussion. If somebody is willing to run a control trial on this is terrific. We love to collaborate, and we love that the insights from psychological science by undergraduate from a course at University of Hong Kong can inform the field. Okay? So seems like good fun. How is this helpful? What can be done with this? So I would have liked to do something with this. This was my plan for the upcoming year or two. I will need to find a different way to do this. A little bit difficult for me as a foreigner in Hong Kong to execute this well. But some people went ahead with this. And there's a very strong group of moral psychologists, especially this guy here, Lucius Caviola and Josh Green, who decided we want to try and implement a solution, a real solution to boost charity. So instead of us telling charities what to do, hoping that they'll run a randomized control trial, maybe we can run our own charity. We can build charities. So actually, the second task in 2024 that I gave the students is, after we've identified over 120 different factors, now build a charity, design a charity. So at least from the course, they came out with a charity plan. And after they graduated, I already know that some of the students decided these charities. But the idea came from these researchers. And these researchers have done and published together with many in our field about the psychology of effective or ineffective altruism. And what we realize is something that we already know from psychology. So we know that people, especially from judgment decision-making, behavioral economics, we realize that people have a gut intuition. People don't care so much about rationality. So in economics, they assume a homo economicus, somebody who's very rational, first has access to all of the information and then makes the rational decision. But people are not like that. So we, first of all, have very limited time, very limited access, and then we make all sorts of gut reactions like emotional appeal. If this talks to us, if we feel connected to this, then we act. And this helps explain a little bit the child in the pond, right? This person, this child is drowning in front of us. We feel like this is our obligation, but far away, it's out of our eyesight. We don't really know about what's happening in other places. And we do care about the in-group or the out-group. Another country, another problem, not my issue. So they were starting to map out emotional appeals seem to talk more to people than effectiveness. So one of the insights is perhaps there is a way for us to reframe the gut intuition that people have for this to get people to think about effectiveness more. So use emotional appeals in order to get people to donate to effective charities. In addition, we wanted to know, do people care about effectiveness? First of all, do they know about effectiveness? So when we ask people, if you compare different charities, so let's say Save the Child versus Against Malaria Foundation versus the Red Cross, what is the difference? How much more is one effective over the other? So people assume maybe the differences is times 1.5, 2, 2.5. But actually, if you try to quantify things, which is what GiveWell is doing, Open Philanthropy is doing, you realize that some charities are 10 times more, 100 times more effective than others. And if you provide this information to participants, to donors, then they act on it. So people underestimate the differences in charity, but when we inform them of this, they take this into consideration. Okay? So they do a bunch of things about this, and the final conclusion is that people don't know how to donate effectively, and people are not motivated to donate effectively because most of what it is that they're doing comes from a social circle. It comes from gut reactions, from intuitions. Okay? So these are the main insights. So there's lots of academic articles about this. Most people estimate 1.5 to 2 times more effectiveness, but sometimes it can be up to 100 times more effective. So for example, Against Malaria Foundation is very cost effective. Giving vitamins, deworming, a lot of different charities can do a lot more per every dollar spent. How do people donate? How do you decide where to donate? People don't do research. Only a third does any research, and most of the research is you go to the charity's website and you browse through it, or you watch some social influencer, right? So how to get people to be more informed, how to share this kind of information. How many people give based on effectiveness? 3%. So now we're getting all this data coming in from this effective altruism movement, and we really care about these things. And what's nice about Lucius Caviola and Josh Green, and this is what I hope to do someday in the next year or two, is to leverage these insights in order to get people to donate more effectively. So here's the example for what it is that they do. So there's a video. It's called Giving Multiplier. It's a very, very effective charity that's really boosting things. But here's a video that explains a little bit about the background.
You want to do something good. Perhaps a donation to a charity? But which one? You want to give in a way that's personally meaningful, a charity that speaks to your heart. But giving isn't just about your feelings. You also want your money to do as much good as possible. Charity experts do research to find the most effective charities. Most people don't know this, but the world's most effective charities are hundreds of times more effective than typical charities. They save many more lives and improve people's lives much more. For example, this charity can cure a child in Kenya infected with parasitic worms for just 66 cents. This reduces children's suffering and allows them to go to school again. That's incredibly effective. But perhaps you don't feel a personal connection to this charity. What should you do? Giving Multiplier offers a simple solution. Divide your donation and a super effective charity recommended by experts. Even better, Giving Multiplier will multiply your impact by adding to both donations. Try it out. Make a donation at givingmultiplier.org.
Yeah. So if I had access to the computer that's over there, I would actually demonstrate this to you because this is a very, very simple website. It doesn't take a very long time in order to set this up. The basic idea behind this is when people donate, they want to feel the warm glow inside. Oh, I did some good. I'm a good person, right? But actually, once they give and donate to something that they care about and gives them the warm glow, it actually does not matter how much they donate. If they donate $1 or donate $10, it doesn't really change how much of the warm glow that they feel. So if you can balance this, so let's say somebody wants to donate 10 US dollars, if you can get them to just use $1 US to donate to what makes them feel good, but then take 9 of this US dollars in order to donate to effective charities, then you've really boosted things up to 100% more to give to those charities that do more good in the world. So they set up a very simple interface, and they use a very simple idea of matching. And they try to say, the more that you allocate to the top effective charities, the more we will match. So they have boosters, all these Bill Gates and Elon Musks or Warren Buffetts that come in and give the money, and saying that they're willing to put money in order to boost other people. So this is a little bit what it looks like. I was trying to screenshot just before the talk today. So at first it says, make a donation. What is your favorite charity? So for example, here I use Save the Children. So this is a charity that I know very, very well. So let's say that I really care about Save the Children. And then it asks me, choose from all these effective altruism charities that are very, very effective, about 100 times more than the average one. So for example, I chose one of the top charities, Against Malaria Foundation. I chose this and it will give me a little bit of information about it. So it provides the information, it tells you something about their effectiveness, and it says, just choose one charity. We're not asking you to donate to it. But then comes the interesting part. And this is the very simple interface that they provide. And they're saying the more that you allocate between what it is that you love on the left and the effective charity that you chose on the right, the more that we will match. So you can see I donate, for example, $100, but because I allocated 70% to the effective charity, actually I was boosted with $63 that they added to result in $163 donation. The more that I add, if I add this into 80, it will be even higher than this. So here is a motivation matching, something that we know from randomized controlled trials that works, in order to get people to move to effective charities, but still keep the warm glow inside because they still feel good about this. If it's not 10%, if it's 20% for you, that's great. Just donate the 80. But then you get also the warm glow of being boosted. So I only have $100 to donate. This is what I can afford. But because I donated effectively, now I can get to $163. Very, very simple idea. And at the beginning, they didn't know if this is going to balance out. They really thought that they'll need all the Warren Buffetts and the out that some of us, about a third of us, love being boosters. They love donating so that other people will get boosted, to get others to donate more. And now, because a third of them are donating to boost, then they have a charity that actually is completely equal. So they have enough people who are boosting and a lot of people that are giving to effective charities. How many did they do? Millions. They've only been running this for 2 years, but this is an example of two social psychologists doing moral psychology, starting from a lab experiment, very, very simple, but decided to put up a charity, the simplest website possible. A good web developer puts this up in like a few hours in order to get people to donate. And this became viral, and a lot of people started to use this. And now people are like, yeah, I have a certain amount of money. I want to be boosted. I go to Giving Multiplier. An amazing impact. This is the kind of stuff that we want to aim for when we have social psychology experiment. So they not only did this website, but as good psychologists, of course, they also ran randomized controlled trials and published this, Science Advances. So for example, you can see here the randomized controlled trials. And it's amazing that if you bundle, personal plus effective, you get a 76% boost. And if you do matching, you have 55% additional on top of that. So with a very simple intervention, you get a very big boost. So at the beginning, we had the overhead stuff. If you just outsource the overhead, 2.5, here, you get more than 100% boost. This is amazing. Very simple website, very simple idea. Started from the lab, started from doing these kinds of experiments. So if we can crowdsource, if we can leverage everything that we're doing with the classroom, with undergraduates, with ChatGPT, whatever, in order to get these insights, we can do more good in the world. So you can see some of the insights. I won't go into this. So I really decided that this is what I wanted to do, doing more good, doing good better. And now I try in my courses to leverage psychological science to inform students how to use this in doing morality and doing helping and so forth. Yeah. In addition to this, one of the things that I spent some time talking about in the methods class just before this is that I do a lot of open science. And I wanted to verify what works and what doesn't work in the literature. So we have a lot of the different findings regarding how people think about morality and what helps people to come out of their apathy in order to care more about the world. So we've done many projects on this. So for example, here, we conducted a meta-analysis on omission bias. And omission bias is a very strange kind of phenomenon, and I think we felt it all in the COVID pandemic. So what inaction do to our minds? And it seems like we attribute a lot more responsibility, accountability to action than inaction. So for example, thinking about vaccinations. In the US, this was initially studied in the 1980s. They had the flu pandemic. It wasn't as bad as the COVID pandemic, but it really had some influences. And then flu shots came out. And people were unwilling to vaccinate their children. Why? Because they said, if the virus takes my child and the child dies, it wasn't me. But if I vaccinated the child and then something happened as a side effect, then I did this, I created this. So it seems like action is more actionable, more accountable, more morally responsible in our minds than not taking action. But if you haven't vaccinated your kid and your kid dies of the flu, this is not your responsibility. Why is that? So this is a bias, and this is what we call omission bias, our morality. We were very surprised when we ran this meta-analysis to find out that actually not a lot of studies have been done. In the 1980s, there was a little bit of a debate, and then people stopped doing anything about this. So during the pandemic, 2022, when this came out, we were calling people, we really need to understand this omission bias, because a lot of Americans especially, but around the world, people are not vaccinating their children, because they're afraid of the accountability of the side effect of getting vaccination. So this is something that we need to understand about our cognition. So you can also translate these classic findings once again to this very, very simple paradigm of charity A and charity B are exactly the same in every possible way. In this case, there's a 95% effectiveness to prevent certain deaths, but there's a may cause, there might be some side effects for 5% of them, as opposed to charity B that has 90%. So 95% with 5% maybe will happen, compared to 90% with no side effects. Which one would you prefer? And people have a very strong preference towards the vaccination that does not have side effects, even if it's more effective. So we care about effectiveness. Sometimes we can inform people and let people know that this is what is happening. And we also ran some replications again and again, and we found the same kind of thing. And I just want to say that in general, all this thing about action in action seems to be very important in our minds. And you can also see this in philosophy. We have the trolley dilemmas about whether people will push the lever in order to change the course for a runaway trolley. Whether we caused it, whether we have causation that leads to accountability is something that repeats again and again in philosophy, experimental philosophy, and moral psychology. And here, it is that if you don't take action, you're still morally responsible, but not as morally responsible as if when you took action. So we see this again and again across many, many domains. And the question that Peter Singer will keep asking is that, does it really matter that we didn't inflict the harm? If the harm at the end. So when we don't help those people in South America, when we don't help the starving, the people who get mosquito bites and die of malaria in South America, in Africa, are we responsible or not? Inaction does not mean that we're not socially, morally accountable for this. In addition, another replication that we did is direct versus indirect harm. So if you cause harm indirectly, saying it's not my responsibility. So I saw a lot of initiatives here for the environment and sustainability. Sometimes we say it's not us causing this. I fly the planes a lot, so it's not me. The plane is going to fly anyway, whether. So maybe if it's indirectly, maybe it's not my responsibility. So people have this thing. If the same harm is done directly or indirectly, people are much more likely to choose the indirect path because they don't feel as morally accountable for this. So we repeated this again, and we have a few insights on this. So this is just to give you a teaser of the things that we can do. When we revisit some of the classics, when we run these very simple scenarios comparing charity A and charity B, when we leverage crowdsource our courses in order to do large team science, and how we can translate some of these insights from the classroom, from simple experiments that we run into real life implications for charities, boosting millions of dollars. If you want to know more about this, and everything that I do with my students and the research that comes out of it is shared on YouTube, so you can go and check this out. In addition, the students actually work together, crowdsource, how to do more good. So they wrote 4 different books. It's amazing, 200, 300 different pages on how to do more good in the different domains. So actually effective altruism goes much further than just medicine or poverty. They address all sorts of things like climate change, global warming. They address all sorts of things like existential risks, the threat of nuclear weapons. More recently, a lot of concern about runaway AI. So what's going to happen if the AI wants to take over the world? Existential risk, can we withstand this as humanity? So different domains, different groups in the class tackle this as chapter, and together they came out with something. It's amazing the kind of work that undergraduates can do if you just give them the right template and you show them the path. Everything that I did is leveraged towards the theme of doing more good, doing good better, combining open science, meta science, collaborative science with all the judgment decision-making, behavioral economics, morality, and all that. If anything that I talked about today is interesting for you, if you want to collaborate with our students, if you want to do this kind of research with us, if you want to just repeat what it is that we've done and implement this here in Vin University, very happy to talk to you and discuss how we can do this more. Everything that I talked about is on my website. There's actually a section on this QR code, giladfeldman.org, about doing more good, doing good better. So you can find everything that I talked about, plus some videos and explanations over there. Don't hesitate to contact me. I know some students feel like contacting professors is a big deal. It really isn't. Even if I'm busy, I will connect you with some of the other people in our team for you to be able to do the effective altruism and doing more good in your own research and classes. Thank you. Yeah, I hope so. I think so. So for example, Manix, the person who did the thesis with me about the first few factors, took the course with me. And where I was trying to figure out, what is this doing more good? What is this give well, effective altruism? What is Peter Singer trying to do? So I was trying to figure this out together with them in class. And after class, Manix came to me and said, I really want to do a thesis on me. Can we do something together? And I said, yeah, let's figure out what was the first finding that came out. And then he identified this book chapter, and then we decided to start from replications, and then we done a lot of extensions. And based on this, I built the entire coursework where Manix was actually helping. And now I know that he cares about this and he's trying to leverage this even further. I keep hearing from students who graduated It's not a representative sample, and I don't have access to all of them to do a survey, but many of them contacted me 2 years later saying either they joined a charity or they designed a charity or they care about these things or they joined Effective Altruism Hong Kong that is slowly growing, or they went to pursue graduate studies in the UK, US, in places where, so for example, Cambridge and Oxford have very large effective altruism groups, to join labs that do this kind of research. So I feel, of all the things that I've done, and I've done all kinds of like open science and meta science where we're trying to fix science and all this, I feel like students really connect to this kind of direction because they really feel, first of all, it tells them something about themselves. It gets them to think about things. It makes them more motivated to do something about the world. So rather than thinking, I'm too small, I don't matter, suddenly they feel, I can actually do something with my skills to have a broad impact, international impact. So some of them are pursuing effective altruism jobs. I'll just say that in my courses, the last session that I do is career choice. And I try to offer a paradigm of how to think about career choice from an effectiveness perspective. So how to leverage things. If you want to be, and a lot of people in Hong Kong want to be, let's say, finance people, completely okay. A lot of finance people in effective altruism just decide to make as much money as possible and contribute 10% of that charity, and then fund a lot of other people that would do the volunteer work. If you want to have a lot of impact through being a researcher or being an educator, you can do that. But we sit together in a circle and we discuss effective. What does it mean to have a contribution to the world? And I feel like they really connect to this. They want more of that. They keep asking, why don't we have more of that?
Literature looking at direct cash transfers?
Yes, definitely. So in effective altruism, cash transfers are considered to be the benchmark. So everything is compared to that. So cash transfers are give directly is like 1, and then everything is how many more times are you compared to a randomized control trial with cash transfers.
So the group knows that just giving somebody money rather than designing a program to teach them a new skill is more effective. And also much cheaper. Give someone cash.
Yeah, so I think, first of all, it's amazing the strong cognitive bias that people have against giving people cash, because the initial thought is, if we give people in poverty, what will they do with it? Yeah. Get drunk, get drugs, I don't know, spend it all on gambling, right? This is what we have in our minds. And a lot of the bad charities that we give as examples for ineffective charities are charities where we come from the Western world, from
we know what's best.
We know what's best. What they need. We come with our own solutions, and then we find out after a few years that it was a complete waste of money. But what we found out from randomized control trials of Give Directly, and actually this won a Nobel Prize, and there's a lot of charities based on this, is if we give people cash, they actually know best what is it that they need. They know how to leverage this, and actually they're very clever about spending these kinds of things. So it's an amazing revolution in the way that we think, starting from a cognitive bias against giving people cash to now understanding this is actually a very effective way of making change in the world. Yeah, no intermediate, no people in the middle that are taking money. You just send directly the money to people, and people know how to use it. Yeah. It works better in developing countries because there are a few trials that ended in the US, so giving people in the US cash directly. Over there, the impact is not as high, but definitely going to third world countries and giving them cash seems to have a big impact. Yeah, thank you for that. All right, great. I'm going to stick around if you want to come talk to me. I'm happy to talk to you. Thank you.